On today's edition of Issues and Insiders, a renowned scholar shares his thoughts about Busan's prospects of hosting the 2030 World Expo and, more broadly, the importance of that particular year as well. Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with a scholar for his thoughts on Busan's chances, that is, of winning the bid to bring home the 2030 World Expo and more. For this, I have Professor Mauro Guillen at the University of Pennsylvania live on the line. Professor Guillén, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, for inviting me.
Professor Guillén, I believe you were in Korea a while back, that is, to attend a conference on Busan's prospects of hosting the 2030 World Expo. What do you believe is Busan's edge over the competition for this particular bid?
Well, I think Busan is becoming a global city in so many different ways. It's deeply embedded in international trade and it has a very vibrant cultural activity. So I think it is very well positioned to obtain this distinction. Let's see what happens, though. Fingers crossed.
Right, my fingers crossed as well. Professor Guillén, the conference I mentioned was actually back in the year 2021, I believe, and it also included a closed session. That being said, were there any areas that pundits like yourself believe that Busan could work on to perhaps boost its chances of winning this bid?
Well, I think there's a number of things that cities can do. I mean, the first priority, I think, should always be to have an environment that is safe, that is welcoming, and that people would like to essentially travel to and spend some time at. Without that, it's very difficult to win distinctions such as this. That is the number one priority. After that, of course, comes having a very good transportation infrastructure and having, as Busan already has, many connections, many linkages to other big cities around the world.
Professor Guillén, what do you care to highlight then as the potential gains that Busan, and of course to a greater extent that Korea as a country, could look to secure by hosting the 2030 World Expo?
Well, I think all of these expo events are magnets. They attract a lot of attention. And I think it is important for a country such as South Korea to have other cities besides Seoul being world-class, being global cities that can have an impact on the world. So bringing the 2030 Expo to Busan, I think, would fulfill all of those requirements there. And most importantly, it will bring business to Korea. And at this point, I think it is something that would be very good for the economy, very good for Busan, but also very good for the South Korean economy as a whole.
Do you believe World Expos, to a great extent, serve to perhaps just boost a country's economy? Or is there more that can be secured from hosting a World Expo?
Look, there are two tangible benefits from hosting such an important event. The first benefit is that, people come in, they bring money. There is a direct injection of cash into the economy. The second benefit is more intangible, which is the image, the reputation, the brand name of the city and the country also get a boost. And that, I think, oftentimes is neglected, but it is really important. And it could actually have a much bigger long-term impact than anything else. So in other words, a city that has hosted such a big event as an expo will be remembered around the world for doing so.
Right. Professor Guillén, some say that geopolitics and not a candidate city's qualifications will dictate the vote for the 2030 World Expo, given the current geopolitical concerns around the world. What do you say?
Well, this is always a consideration. That is to say, when countries vote for a candidate to become the host of, let's say, the Olympic Games or a major sporting event in, for example, football or an expo, they will take into account all sorts of things. But the good news, Bonnie, is that South Korea has a very good reputation. You are a country that gets along with every country in the world, I would say. So, in other words, you have everything going that way from a geopolitical point of view. I don't think that is in any way going to represent a handicap for Busan or for South Korea. In fact, I believe the contrary, that it will be a bonus.
Professor Guillén, what is the relevance of an expo in today's world of convenient travel as well as comfortable exposure to diverse culture and, of course, technology?
Well, again, South Korea is known as a country that has produced very important technologies, especially consumer-oriented technologies in electronics and the internet, digital platforms, and so on and so forth. Korea has become not only an exporter of goods, but also an exporter of services, including culture, like movies or music. So hosting an event such as this, I think, just contributes to creating this kind of an image of a country that has a lot to offer to the rest of the world, and in particular also a city, Busan, that has so much to offer to the rest of the world.
And with all that in mind, Professor, how can the lucky city that wins the vote, of course, on November 28th, that is this Tuesday for the 2030 World Expo, work to ensure a remarkable and relevant event?
Well, I think the most important thing is to convey confidence. That is to say that Busan can organize this kind of an event, that it has the skills, it has the motivation to organize an event such as this. You also need to signal that the population of Busan is solidly behind this, because you would want people to attend the events. You don't want any venue to be sparsely populated. You want, full audiences and so on and so forth. So the more commitment, the more confidence that you can display between now and the big decision day, I think will essentially increase your chances of obtaining the big prize.
Professor Guillén, beyond the World Expo itself, the year 2030 appears to be of much interest to you as well. You published a book, I believe, in 2020 about how today's biggest trends will collide and reshape the future of everything in 2030. Now, among the changes that you speak of, Professor, is the reality that more grandparents than grandchildren's will be there in the world in that particular year. Now, this is a reality that Korea itself is also quite concerned about. Is there a way to reverse this particular trend?
Well, you're pointing out something that is really important. It's happening in every country in the world, which is population aging. We have a bigger proportion of the population, let's say above the age of 50 or above the age of 60. But you're also correct in saying that among all countries in the world, South Korea is perhaps one of the countries, along with Japan and China, that are more advanced in terms of this trend towards population aging. And that's because your fertility rate, the number of babies per woman, is one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in the world. So the only way really to reverse this is to think about ways in which you can make it easier for young couples, especially the women, to have children. So of course, in South Korea now, women are very highly educated and they want to pursue their careers, their professional careers. So I think what is really important is that both the government and big employers, the big companies in Korea, they offer these women who want to have a career opportunities for also being mothers. This is really, really important. And the other thing, of course, that at some point, I think countries such as Japan, China, and also yours, South Korea, will need to consider is immigration. So I know that in Northeast Asia, immigration is not something that is the same as, let's say, in the United States or in Canada or in Australia. But I think sooner or later, there will need to be some renewed openness towards immigration, because otherwise it's very difficult to rebalance the age structure of the population so that you have plenty of young people who are in working age.
Professor, with regard to the situation here in the country, some people claim that the birth rate is also linked to the education system in the country, the fact that it is quite relatively, that is, more expensive to educate a child here in the country than in some other parts of the world. Where do you stand with regard to that particular concern?
Yes, that is a very valid concern. So in other words, let's think about young couples, right? So young couples will have more children if they don't think that this is going to disrupt their lives too massively, if they think they can afford an additional child, and if they think that that child will have opportunities. Now, I think opportunities will exist in Korea for those children, because the South Korean economy is relatively dynamic. You have excellent world-class companies and so on and so forth. But you still need to persuade young couples, especially the women, the would-be mothers, to have children or more children. And this is a really important thing to do. And among other things, once again, what you have is to provide them with childcare, to provide them with assurances that they will not have to abandon their career, that they will be able to continue working. And anything that you can do on the cost side, as you suggested, meaning making it cheaper to have a child who can then pursue a great education, that's also something that is going to help.
Right, hopefully. Professor Guillén, in your book, you also claim that there will be more robots than workers and more computers than human brains. How worried should we as humans be?
I don't think we should be, very worried about it. We should be concerned in the sense that I think the way in which we do our jobs will change. But I don't think it's necessarily the case that our jobs will be eliminated. So, for example, your job as a television anchor or my job as a professor, I think will change as a result of new technologies. It has already changed. So television is not the same as it once was. And teaching at a university is not the same kind of activity as it once was. Technology has already changed our jobs. So I think that should be people's utmost concern. And what people should do is not have fear for these changes. What they should do is prepare for those changes and try to be the best possible professional person in that job, knowing that technology will play an increasing role.
Professor, I understand how that reality may change for me. We have the possibility of AI anchoring the news in the very near future. How has that reality changed for you as a professor when you talk about changes that you're experiencing in your field?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I would prefer you to be the anchor and not a robot or a computer.
Thank you for your kind words.
I think, for me as a professor, I can become a better professor if I embrace AI, because I can better prepare my classes, I can do better research, and I can also change the way in which I interact with the students. I can offer them more immersive experiences if I combine AI, for example, with the metaverse. So it is up to me as a professor to become better at what I do, to offer my students a far more exciting learning experience than what I've had in the past. So I don't think, as a professor, I should blame the technology. I should blame myself if I don't do everything that I can to incorporate all of these new technologies so that my students can have the best possible learning experience. And as you know, young generations these days, they want to learn through technology. They like using technology as they learn. So I have to change them. It is my responsibility to change.
Keeping that in mind, Professor Guillén, what technology with regard to the academic arena would you like to see at the 2030 World Expo? A technology that perhaps will promote, enhance the learning environment?
Well, I think perhaps the technology that I see having the most potential, but I want to emphasize its potential because I don't think the current state of the technology is good enough, is the metaverse. Anything that is immersive, so virtual reality, enhanced reality, the metaverse. Because you see, in universities, we have been teaching for a long time in the same way. You have the audience in the room and you have the professor in front of them. And I think what we need is to bring to the classroom more immersive experiences. So what we do oftentimes is take the students, of course, on study trips, and that's a way of immersing the students in another context. But with the metaverse, with virtual reality, with enhanced reality, now we can bring the world to the classroom. And we need to work on that, I think, because what is very clear is that immersive learning is always more effective. People learn faster when they are immersed in the topic.
Professor, back to your book then. You also talk about how more global wealth will be owned by women than men in 2030. Do you care to elaborate?
Yes. So what's going on is that women, of course, have been making progress in terms of their careers. Of course, I don't deny that there is discrimination, meaning that oftentimes women are not paid as much as men, and oftentimes also they're not promoted as fast as men. But in spite of that, what we see is that women right now, as we speak, are accumulating wealth faster than men. And if they're doing that now, that means that within a few years, then perhaps more than half of the wealth in the world will be owned by women. And that's what I'm predicting will happen approximately by the year 2030. Now, this is going to have major consequences, of course, but the point is that women are doing better in spite of discrimination in the workplace, in companies, and they're accumulating wealth faster than men. And also, I think this is also true in South Korea. It is certainly true in the United States. There's now more women in universities than men. And not only that, they get better grades. So this happens in my classes. So sooner or later, that's going to have an impact, right? And I don't think women get better grades in university here in the United States, for example, because they're more intelligent than men. It's because I think they work harder. They're more responsible. and they care about their future more than men.
Do you see that particular reality also taking place in countries that are less privileged? For example, in Africa or in parts of Asia, do you see women taking on a greater share of the wealth there as well? In 2030, of course?
No, absolutely. Perhaps Africa no, because they're a little bit farther behind. So it will take maybe another 10 or 20 years for Africa to be where the United States or South Korea or China are going to be by the year 2030. But we see the same trend of women doing better in school, women pursuing a university education, and women, for example, becoming entrepreneurs in greater numbers than in the past. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that the life chances, the career chances of women have increased so much that now the opportunities available to women are so different than the opportunities that were available to their mothers or to their grandmothers. This is one of the most important changes in the world.
And keeping that in mind, Professor, again, how can people, including perhaps my husband, prepare for 2030 when the reality is that I'll be making much more than him, of course? But all jokes aside, what are your suggestions to better prepare for the year 2030 amid these vast changes?
Well, it's going to be tough for men, including myself, because, for the longest time, it seems as if we had a monopoly, right, over jobs and over everything. But again, now women are making a lot of progress. For example, in the United States, among married women who have a husband, 29% of the women who are married in the United States make more money than their husbands. 29%. You see, just 20 years ago, it was only 3 or 4%, but now it's already 29%. And before we realize it, it's going to be more than 50%. So this is changing very quickly. And I think men like myself, or like your husband, what we need to do is to adjust to the situation, which is that we're no longer alone in the workplace. We also have women, and women work very hard, and they're getting ahead.
Right, and hopefully he'll listen to your words when he watches this. Professor, I'm wondering, we're going to end perhaps with a few words more about Busan as it awaits the vote that will take place on Tuesday, the 28th of November. That being said, what are your personal thoughts with regard to Busan's prospects of winning this bid to host the World Expo in the year 2030?
Well, I think I feel very optimistic about it for several reasons. The first is, as I told you, is that I think Busan and South Korea as a country, you project an image to the world of friendliness, of competence, meaning, you're a country that is well-run, well-governed, that it has a dynamic economy. And it is, I think, also the case that Busan has made the right investments in infrastructure, the right investments in terms of building relationships with other parts of the world. It is primarily, of course, a commercial city. So Busan has that big advantage of having all of these relationships with the rest of the world. So I feel confident, but of course, I don't vote and I don't decide. But if it were up to me, I would just, give it to Busan, of course.
Thank you so much for your words. All right, Professor Guillén, thank you very much for your insights today.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie, for having me. And fingers crossed, I hope that this works for Busan.
All right, I'll keep my fingers crossed as well. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Issues and Insiders. We return same time tomorrow, so do join us then. Thank you for now.